All right, hello and welcome to episode 1 of our Kubernetes Cloud Native Security Meetup. My name is Tam Nguyen. I'm one of the organizers. I'm coming from you live from Mountain View, California. I'll let our other 2 organizers introduce themselves.
Hey everyone, I'm Michael Foster. I'm coming to you live from Toronto. I'm a cloud native cloud native advocate for StackRox.
Thank you, Michael. My name is Steve Jaguar. I'm coming to you from the United Kingdom, and I'm a cloud native security advocate at StackRox.
Awesome. So why did we create this meetup? There's a lot of interest in Kubernetes security, and we wanted to get a forum together where the community can come together on a regular cadence, rotating speakers around the globe. And so here we are. For the agenda today, let me pull this up. We have our Kubernetes security update. So I'll let Michael and Steve go over the details on that, but that's something we want to do every month, just keep everyone all updated on Kubernetes security news. And then we have a session on chaos engineering with love and destruction with Jessica Cherry. So I'm super excited about that one. And then we also have Michael Foster telling us everything we need to know about the Certified Kubernetes Security Specialist, also known as CKS. All right, so intent here is to have meetups scheduled each month, second Thursday. So keeping that on a regular cadence. And then we just, want to share knowledge. So a lot of you have asked, how do I submit a call for papers? We have a link for that. So let me pull that up, and I will also post that on the live chat as well. But yeah, submit talks. We'd love to have you on anything Kubernetes security related. All right, so let's see. I guess last thing is have fun. Steve, you want to tell everyone about our hybrid format?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, I guess, Kubernetes meetups are generally localized, but given lockdown, we're spreading across the globe, and you can already tell we've got how many time zones covered? 8, roughly.
Yeah.
At the moment, because we're looking to start meetups while I'm already covering London, we're looking to start meetups in Dublin, in Amsterdam, but generally, well, we did think we jokingly said take over the world, but we're not literally going to do that. But yeah, and then once we go back to the real world, we will create actual meetups where we can all meet face to face.
And the nice thing about this hybrid format is we can meet you all in person, and we can also record it and get it online. So if you miss the meetup, you can still get the content. We're going to basically push out the whole meetup for you to see, and we'll also take snippets of the individual speakers so that you can get a distilled version. If you just want to catch a single speaker, feel free to do that. If you want to follow along, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell, get some notifications. We'll be live on Twitch as well. And yeah, we just look forward to bringing you guys content from all over the globe, from a lot of different speakers around Kubernetes security. And,
awesome.
Yeah.
And then let's see, we'd love your feedback. So look out for a post-event survey. If you're a live attendee and you fill out the survey, you get a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card. So I'll post that survey link up in chat as well, and look out for it in our post-event emails. For next month, I want to share what we have for our lineup. So let me, there we go. We have Taylor Dozal. He's a senior developer advocate and CNCF ambassador at HashiCorp. So he'll be talking about secrets. And then we'll also talk about DEI. So that will be super interesting. We'll have Cyber DEI on for next month. That's February 11th, same time. So catch us next month, and we'll post the details on meetups for that as well. All right, so let's get started. I will hop off, and then we'll get the K8s security news update going.
All right. There we go. Oh.
That was frightening.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening there. All right. So at the beginning of every meetup, we wanted to take 5 to 10 minutes just to go over any, big vulnerabilities, Kubernetes news, anything in the security realm, doesn't necessarily need to be Kubernetes specific. We would love to hear from you guys. So if you're in the chat and you see, some crazy article about, Bitcoin being hacked or something like that, love to hear that stuff. But as for right now, we just kind of want to summarize the last couple of months. It's been a little slow, the holidays, well, at least slow in the Kubernetes world, the holidays and everything like that. So just want to recap a little bit. At KubeCon, if you guys are aware, the Kubernetes release cadence has changed. There's 3 releases that last year, and there's planned for 3 releases this year. So just look out for that, and make adjustments to your updates accordingly. Docker deprecation was also mentioned. It's not going to be supported by Kubernetes anymore. That being said, Docker has said that they will still support the shim, so you'll still be able to use Docker, but look out for those new runtimes and the different container operating systems that are coming out from different providers. Steve, I think you had some other thoughts on this too.
In terms of Kubernetes security, the big deal in December was, of course, the announced CVE of the men in the middle attack. So that's the sort of thing that we'll be covering here and going into a little bit more detail on in the future.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just as a general, I guess, CNCF announcement, KubeCon North America CFP, the call for papers is opening soon. So we'll give you more information on that, but just look for that. The window will be open soon. And without further ado,
kick me out.
No, Steve, you're up. I'm not kicking you out.
Foster, you're the one who's introducing Jessica. Jessica Cherry.
All right, this is going well.
This is our first one, so you can see that we've got a lot of practice in, Jessica.
Yeah, 1 second. Let's see if the share screen works this time.
Are you ready?
Looks like it does. Hi, I'm Jessica Cherry. I'm here to talk to you guys about love and destruction. And as far as that goes, chaos engineering. Who am I? I'm just a random lady that likes to talk and rant and write about Kubernetes, but mostly my job is literally to wreck things and plan around how those things get wrecked. I have a Twitter, a LinkedIn, things I write about on opensource.com, and then a GitHub page that covers all sorts of random things I've thrown together, and it's poorly coordinated. All right, so why do you love your Kubernetes cluster, right? You made it, it's a cool cluster, you lovingly built this cluster, added all your applications, and in one case, spent 2 years doing it, in my case. You spend hours making sure everything works properly. It's the greatest triumph of your work. You're like the happiest person on earth to have this cluster. Or maybe you just love Kubernetes. Who knows? I don't know you. You don't know me. It's okay. I love Kubernetes. You love Kubernetes. Everybody loves Kubernetes. All right, so let's talk about the random breakdown or on-call incident. So usually something goes horrifically wrong. It leads to an incident, there's postmortems, there's temporary fix. Everybody forgets about the temporary fix. And then we kind of go about our regular everyday. And then there's, all of these things that happen in one shot. So we end up calling a very specific group of people. So who do we call during this incident? In this case, I call it the heroes. These people know everything. They've been here for like 10 billion years. They were here at the beginning of the company and they have not left. And it feels like they've been here for centuries. They know everything about everything from something that happened like 20 years ago in your backlog that you would have never thought about because you were still in college or off doing some random other job. And so that means they come in, they swoop, they save the day, everybody's happy. And again, we forget about it. They'll remember for some reason, but that's how this works. So after that happens, and after the heroes come through and sweep the day, and the knowledge of history has fixed the issue and we move on with some temporary fix or a patch, we all forget and keep going, which is fine, I guess, but we all know what this looks like, as you can see with the fine dog. In the end, we end up back in fire. No one really has any documentation because guess what? It's still in the hero's mind. And nobody wrote anything down. And maybe 3 people that are still at the company are going to remember how it got fixed originally And there's no possible way you've ever dealt with this before, and there's no possible way I've ever been through this before, but that kind of becomes our cyclical, this is broken, nobody writes it down, 3 different people know what happened from like 20 years ago, and then we start all over again. So what do we need to destroy? What do we need to change? You need to constantly destroy the things you love. In my case, Kubernetes. In your case, Kubernetes, because that's what we're talking about. You're loving it today. We need to end the tribal knowledge, and that tribal knowledge is your heroes, right? They have this knowledge from centuries upon centuries upon centuries of being at the company. The on-call incidences kind of like need to be more documented, and the heroes who know everything about the cluster need to be sat down, kind of interviewed, sorted out, and document more of this. And then we need to document your environment itself in its stable format. And so I don't know if I'm hitting this hard enough or beating it to death, but documentation is the key to fixing a lot of this, and that'll melt into our chaos engineering. So how do I start this, right? We start taking notes during outages, add post-outage meeting, monitor your systems, and get ready for some chaos engineering science. Boop. All right, so what is chaos engineering? My joke of the day on this is it's disaster recovery planning's more organized twin sister. More science, more planning, and method than you would actually expect. So what does it require? Define and measure your systems, right? At stable state, we want to watch and define what that looks like, and keep that measurement on a regular basis. You need a hypothesis of what will happen and what should happen. And if it fails sauces during the chaos engineering, that's what you need to fix. And then we plan and create and run that simulation. So we have this huge plan, or we've used something from the past. We're going to go ahead and simulate the issue. Boop. All right. So on that note, I have this fancy decision graph, right? How do I know when to destroy things? Well, should it break? Has it broken? Yes or no? Use what you have from the past incidences to make a plan, break it again. Has it not broken? Time to break it with a new plan. Quite clearly, we're always going to destroy everything on a regular basis, and cover that regular basis here in a second. Okay, as previously stated, when do I chaos engineer? Now that you've seen the fancy graph of let's break everything pretty regularly, and before we move on to the tool sets to create the breakages, let's just cover quickly when the best time to engineer is. Now, seeing as I do this for a living, my plan is always going to be anytime, all the time, you know, this is what I do for a living. However, if that's not working for you, and it won't, and you need to move forward with work, you're going to start with twice a year and kind of work up to 4 times a year, once a quarter, and eventually, as needed, once a month. And it'll feed into disaster recovery planning. Boop. So what tools do I need to just start this whole brand new plan? For starters, monitoring systems. The 2 most used that I've seen so far are Prometheus and Grafana. Well, I'd love to go into this more. Those are the 2 I suggest looking into first. A list of your historical issues from your environment, and some new fancy Helm charts and tools. Because guess what? It's tool time now. So wait, what chaos engineering tools are you talking about? And I'm glad you asked about that. So let's talk about those really quick. So I picked the first one to be the fun one, right? We have Cube Invaders. Basically, what you can do is destroy pods, pretending that you're playing Space Invaders, right? You jump in between namespaces, you can manually pick pods, you can have some fun breaking stuff. However, like the downside and kind of noteworthy piece is this does not work with EKS. All right, and so the next, a little bit more serious, chaos engineering with a side of web UI. So this is currently hosted by the CNCF, which is Cloud Foundation. It currently has a list of experiences you can choose from. They're all predefined for your cluster. They have a web front end that you can kind of look and see how the testing went. You can determine and define your own experiments within the YAML, but that does require some knowledge behind how to use YAML files and kind of what you want to test. Once it's generated, you apply the experiment, you let it run. Tool doesn't really require too much if you're just going to do a Helm install and use what's predefined. Once you get past that point, however, it does get a little bit more detailed with how much experience that you need. And I'm going to throw you a couple of screenshots. And so for Chaos Mesh, I ran one simple test on the network. And as you can see, it tells you how long it took, what kind of latency we're looking at pinging a kube system pod, and just an overview of what experiments are running right now, whether they paused or failed or waiting or finished. So let's go on to the serious tool. This tool is called Litmus. This is more CLI heavy, which means there's a lot of time in the terminal, but it does have a lot of predefined tests for just about any issue you can run into. There is a chaos hub that you can actually look into with Litmus where people are defining all of these tools. And so when you go through, you can actually pick your experiments. And since it's largely community based, and the community is definitely behind this tool largely, there is a lot of room for you to actually go in and add more experiments yourself. And I threw like little kubectl chaos result for, I just popped a basic Nginx pod and I said, hey, test whether you'll delete it or not. And you get an awaited and then you get a passed, right? So it waited for a little bit for what kind of result came out of that experiment. And then once it's finished, it hit passed and shows up in the messaging. All right, so my last kind of choice is what I'd call the beginner's choice personally. It's called Chaos Cube. This only kills pods by default, right? On a regular every 10 minute in any namespace run. So essentially it's to measure your system when there's regular interruptions, right? Like you want to see what happens if every 10 minutes something is, something is dying. So it's kind of like system stress under arbitrary failure over time. Sometimes it's helpful to have random pods just die to see if you have a good system read. It also gives you an option of what happens with your application when its pod dies. So it also gives you a good read on an arbitrary failure within your application. So it is actually very filtery, right? So this tool can be limited by days and times. You can limit your holidays. You can limit the minimum age of the pod to test against. You can limit the namespaces. Like, honestly, it's just TLDR, lots of filtering. You can narrow this down to like certain windows of times just to get the monitoring while this is going on, and then it stops and you move on with your life now that you have a new basic system check of what happens when arbitrary failures happen. And this one's pretty quick because all it is a really quick Helm install and you're good to go. This one doesn't have a lot of screenshots because it's all CLI based and it was lots of output. Now that you have your list of tools, we kind of roll through a quick recap of my super speedy TLDR chaos engineering. So just to kind of cover everything real quick, monitor everything, keep numbers of your stable times, kind of keep everything together, come up with a plan of failure, or use one that has happened to generate your engineering behind the chaos. Right? And then we're going to test with the new tools, and hopefully you're wrong about what's going to happen. Hopefully it stays stable. But if you're wrong and it has caused some massive destruction, write that down and start planning around how to fix this for the future. And then again, because I'm me, documentation is key. You need to write lots of it. That kind of is where the best parts of this come in, is just keeping a lot of notes. And then last step, profit, who knows? My other little bits here is, if you want to learn more, there is a GitHub that has awesome chaos engineering, which is a lot of tools and books and links and classes that are all free. There are also a large amount of forums that are available too. So if you Google awesome chaos engineering, you'll find a really good GitHub link. And just so we're all aware, the end goal of chaos engineering is starting where you are today, where everything's on fire all the time, to come down to the point where you are the fire causing the destruction. And now you have stable systems and everything is great now. So that is my talk on chaos engineering. Somebody asked if there were commercial enterprise solutions that I could list. I'm sure they are, but I personally do a lot more open source than I do commercial. You're muted.
You don't have to whisper that I'm muted. You can just shout it right at me if you want. It wouldn't be in public without mute. I did that intentionally. So that was a good question from Aaron in the chat about other commercial solutions. Probably, if there's not, why not create one? That would be good, wouldn't it? In terms of eliminating tribal knowledge, I'm going to ask you maybe a controversial question. A lot of the people in organizations who have been there a long time and have that superhero tribal knowledge are the ones making the decisions about whether they would use a philosophy like chaos engineering. And there might be a concern that it might be, I don't know, something that might be a problem with job security. So have you ever experienced resistance to chaos engineering?
Yeah. Actually, my previous job, I was one of the 3 tribal knowledge people, and I was tired of being on call. And my 2 counterparts were not a huge fan of the chaos engineering, just for the sake of, well, that means more people would know things. Well, yes, that's what you want. You want to sleep. I know there's like a lot of pushback on that because job security is always, important to everybody, but more along the discussion of, do you want to sleep and have more free time, seems to be the best route I've gone with a lot of people. And like basically coming up with an interview process, right? Like I work with somebody now that knows everything, and every once in a while I just call her up and kind of interview her, like, hey, tell me who you know and what kind of things that come around this one project here. So does make it more friendly, kind of like get to know you, but also give me your information.
Excellent. One more question then. If I've got a system up and running, it's relatively complex. I haven't done chaos engineering. I like the idea of it. How do I take something that is existing and without knowing that I didn't design it and it might be very bad for me to try and to start destroying things? How could I test this and learn this or migrate it to chaos engineering?
So I've actually run into that before. Generally, you can take code and your system and replicate it in a staging area. And that's where I would start is, set up a small staging area and start running from there. And then eventually over time, you can move to production type of chaos engineering. Although those I always suggest within a certain window of time where nobody's using your equipment. Very
cool. Okay, cool. I think the last one is, are there there's certifications for everything. Speaking of certifications coming up next, are there anything in this space for chaos engineering? Is there a way to certify yourself as a chaos engineer?
I haven't found anything. I know it's like the new for 2021, like chaos engineering's gonna be the new Kubernetes thing this year.
Yeah, it's a pretty hot topic. Awesome. Okay, I'll stop it right there. Thank you very much, Jessica, for being on Kubernetes Security.
All right.
All right, Tamara, work your magic. Next, we have coming up none other than the person you saw earlier, Michael Foster, who is he's already started doing an awful lot of research, given that the CKS was only announced last November. And I'm really excited to hear more about it. So I'm gonna, without any further discussion, I'm gonna let you take it away, Michael.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro, Steve. And hopefully this comes up. It really is not liking it right now. All right. So yes, the CKS. Here to tell you everything you need to know without giving away too much. So I have a fine line. I'm not telling you anything. I'm just going to go over broad topics, how to, get started with the test, and what you need to know. So again, what we'll cover, I'm just going to intro the test, look at the structure, the format, give you kind of a section breakdown of all the different topics, and just my general tips for taking the exam and what I've learned during the process. So let's start off with the exam structure. So if you are familiar with the CKA or the CKAD, they're all the same structure. It's 2 hours long, requires a passing score of 67%, and 15 to 20 performance-based tasks, version 119, which is actually a really huge consideration if a lot of companies and organizations are still using 115. So you have to get up to speed with some of the newer functionality. A couple other things are the free retake. It's valid for 2 years, and you have 12 months to take it. So the free retake is very important, especially in the context of a CLI type exam and a performance-based exam such as the CKS. Now for the exam format, this stuff is on the Linux Foundation's website. It's a little bit of context that they give you. I added a little bit of my own because some of the stuff they somewhat leave out and I think is worthwhile. But basically, when you're going to get into the test, you're going to have, like they said, 15 to 20 questions, and you're going to have a bunch of different clusters as well. So each cluster is going to have a performance-based question, something that you have to do. You have to make sure that you have the right cluster configuration and that you read the context before actually addressing the cluster, because since there are so many environments during this test, you can easily get mixed up. So again, at the start of each task in the exam, an info box is going to be there telling you all that you need to know. Make sure that you read it all the way through and truly understand what is happening before you move on. I did it. You get flustered. There's a lot of information. Read it before you move on. So yeah, there's a lot of the stuff in the info box is actually, you can copy and paste it into the terminal. So there's going to be a context for every question. And with some questions, you're going to have to SSH into the nodes. You don't need to know IPs or anything. It's going to give you the exact copy paste command. You just have to type SSH and then whatever node you're going to go into. Assume you have elevated privileges on the node. This is something like, it is pretty much your environment. You are the admin during this test. So whatever you want to do, you do have permissions. If you want to go and delete a bunch of stuff, you can do that. Don't recommend it. So just an FYI, just be careful when you're doing things. If you're creating a file, create it, copy files, don't delete files. But yeah, the other thing is sometimes when you're SSHing into a node, make sure that you return to the base node. There's going to be one environment that you enter, and that's going to be sort of your orchestrator node for the test. You can go into a node and all of a sudden you switch context and the next question, you can get a little flustered. So just make sure that you exit. And yeah, that's pretty much my notes for now. These are a couple extra ones that I threw in there. CKS environment is currently running version 119. Since the CKS is going to be continually updated, this will change. So again, if you're watching this video a year into the future, just know that it probably is not relevant. And like Kubernetes, it's going to evolve, and we are going to be testing new security and new security aspects in the future. One of the other things that they actually don't mention that I found really interesting when I got in is VI Vim is the default editor for the exam. So if you have a specific editor that you like, you're going to have to install it, especially on that kind of orchestrator node. When you get in, if you have a specific one, install your editing tool that you like, or get good with VI and Vim. All right, now on to the exam sections. So there are 6 sections, and I actually really like the way the CNCF broke this up. So section 1 is cluster setup. So it's all about when you set up a cluster, what environment are you coming into, right? Are we making sure that all of our configuration files are accurate, our network policy set up, ingress objects are set up properly, and just general protection of the nodes themselves, protecting our metadata and minimizing access, not having any exposed graphic user interfaces. So section 2 is cluster hardening. This is really about access to the API. So you're talking authentication, authorization, and just general access with RBAC controls, and minimizing permissions where possible. Section 3. So now we're on to system hardening. So we're going to try to minimize the host OS footprint. We have IAM roles. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the sort of vaguer topics coming up, but that's one of them. Minimize external access to the network and appropriately use kernel hardening tools such as AppArmor or SecComp. So for minimize microservices vulnerabilities, we have setting up appropriate OS level security domains. So pod security policies using open policy agent, security contexts, just general management of Kubernetes secrets. If you've done a CKA, this is just kind of a broad topic that should always be brought up and understood. Using container runtime sandboxes. So somewhat new, especially with a Docker deprecation, you're going to see different runtimes and maybe different runtimes in different nodes. So we need to know how we're actually going to know what runtimes to schedule with through Kubernetes. And then implementing pod-to-pod encryption using MTLS. One of my favorite sections, and I'm very happy that the CNCF implemented it, was supply chain security. So we're talking minimizing base image footprints, securing the supply chain. So, blocking allowed registries, assigning and validating images, and then just generally, using static analysis of user workloads. So looking at our Kubernetes resources, our Docker files, and scanning images for vulnerabilities. Obviously, it's good. It's interested, and I'll get into it. It's interesting to see how they incorporated all this into the test, and I'm really glad they did, because really security is not just Kubernetes, but it is all the ecosystem around it. So looking forward to talking about that. And then lastly, this is a big slide, but monitoring, logging, and runtime security. It's sort of vague ways of basically saying performing behavior analytics. So looking at logs to assess like what's going on, understanding how to actually get those logs and configure the logs so that we're not just spitting every single log out, just general maintenance of the cluster, and looking at immutability, and finding bad actors in the cluster. So those are the 6 sections. And now I'm going to try to go through just a quick concept breakdown. This is not as structured because I didn't want to basically say, here's cluster setup and this is what you need to know. Some of these topics are brought up in that section, but they, kind of work their way into other sections. So starting with network policies. Network policies, especially with, the various CNIs they're becoming basically commonplace now. I remember I went to a Microsoft meetup 2 years ago, and we were basically just talking about implementing default deny policies. So network policies, they got an update for version 119. They have a lot more features. So they have IP blocks, labels, and selectors. They have to and from blocks as well. So we can manage the traffic to and from the different pods. It's worthwhile to understand the ins and outs of network policies and how to apply them. Cluster benchmarks. So you saw at the beginning of cluster setup, we were talking about making sure that your cluster was, exactly set up properly. KubeBench is a CNCF tool to help you do that. It runs CIS benchmarks 1.5 and 1.6, I believe, to tell you, hey, this, you have insecure port open or something like that. So make sure that you understand how to use KubeBench, and especially what to do with, the information. So let's say you did implement a tool like this and they say, hey, your cluster's not secure. How would you make it secure, right? You need to know the ins and outs of, you get information, what do you do with that to make your cluster secure and continually secure moving forward? Ingress objects. So 3 types of ingress controller setups. A new sort of addition is the ingress class that has come up. So, as we decide that we want to have multiple ingresses in multiple different namespaces, or multiple ingress in a single namespace, we have to know how to specify which ingresses are there, so that we're not just creating an application and it's automatically hooking up to the default ingress in that namespace. So as different deployments get more complex, we need other objects to make sure that our ingress is set up properly. Worth taking a look at that as well. Minimizing access. Minimizing access, just a general topic, but it really is fueled by some of the security hacks that have come up in the past. So Kubernetes dashboard being deployed by default, and I'm sure that this has happened for a lot of people, but there are a lot of defaults when you open up a Kubernetes cluster. So we want to make sure that those defaults, those graphic user interfaces, any extra endpoints are shut down. All right, on to API access, which is everything authentication, authorization, and admission controls. Admission controllers take a big seat in this exam. There are a lot of different admission controllers, and it's worth getting to know all of them because they all have their use cases. So let's start off with RBAC. RBAC is at the core of how we apply policies in Kubernetes. Not even as a security level, but if you're working in Kubernetes, you really need to understand and know how to apply RBAC and do it efficiently. Allowing elevated privileges just from a misconfiguration of RBAC is one of the top security concerns in Kubernetes. So know how to apply roles, cluster roles, role bindings, learn how to also do it somewhat quickly as well. Yes, there will be a recorded version. I apologize if the audio is a little bit choppy. So I got to go back. So for default accounts, there is the proper implementation of subjects. So we have user groups and service accounts. We need to know how to differentiate from them, when to apply them, and how to set them with the lowest permissions. So just be aware, you can always use the auth CANI as well to figure out permissions. And it actually is really useful if you're ever doing, like, honestly, just the CKA, CKAD. If you need to know if a service account has permissions, use the auth CANI. It will tell you if it has the ability to, let's say, list deployments or do things of that sort. And then Kubernetes updates. This, I actually think, was somewhat of a push just from the CNCF community as a whole, because we are seeing, I think the most used version right now is 1.15. Obviously, as organizations adopt Kubernetes, like part of the K8s engineering talk, you actually have to go through an upgrade process. It's worth understanding the ins and outs of the various upgrades. And as Kubernetes moves forward with its release cycles, the Kubernetes community is going to move forward as well. With the CKS as 1.19, it's probably going to be 1.22 by the end of the year. So again, it's worthwhile knowing exactly how to upgrade your clusters for your organizations. So minimizing OS footprints. And like I said, this is not just the Kubernetes, this is also whole life cycle. So you think minimizing host OS footprints, what does it have to do with Kubernetes? Well, not only in your images, do you have to make sure that you don't have unnecessary packages and you're not opening any unneeded ports or anything like that, but on your operating system and your host node or VM, you also have to do the same thing. So understand the tools and how to do that on the various nodes. AppArmor. One of my favorite conversations around the CKS was the introduction of outside technologies, outside apps. So one of the things I didn't mention was there is, Falco makes an appearance, AppArmor, KubeBench. So a bunch of CNCF resources are making their appearance, and it really is to test you on the understanding of the various tools and the integrations to the ecosystem, because security is not just Kubernetes, it is the surrounding ecosystem. So understand AppArmor, understand how it's applied, understand the various kind of core tools that work in the Linux ecosystem. All right, so for security context, this is obviously a big one. Enforced through pod security policies. This security context can be either at the container pod level and also enforced through pod security policies. Really understand them first at the container and pod level, as pod security policies are looking to be deprecated. So something to tune into and make sure that you are aware of. But again, understand the impacts of user IDs, group IDs, Linux capabilities, privilege escalation, any mounted file systems that can be mounted in your pods to execute any malicious code. Using those security contexts and using them in a way that actually disallows all privileges and disallows Linux capabilities will save you from any escalation that shouldn't be, that's not needed. Again, like I've mentioned, I got into this slide a little bit too early, but pod security policies, they are due for deprecation. They're enforcement mechanisms for security contexts at they're a cluster resource, but they're applied at the namespace level through RBAC. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of the life cycle, what happens with pod security policies, but worth understanding how to apply them and how to look at RBAC how to use RBAC for different enforcement mechanisms. So this is actually an interesting conversation that I had with a couple of people. Was the open policy agent gets a mention. Now, with the Kubernetes documentation and what you're allowed to bring, there's no mention of Open Policy Agent in the documentation. So I'm kind of curious to see what happens in the CKS in the coming months. I think there might be a use case where Open Policy Agent gets more of a front and center sort of stage in when PSPs kind of get phased out. But there is a couple blogs on the Kubernetes website, Kubernetes documentation, that I recommend you go read so you understand Open Policy Agent and how you can apply them in your cluster. Kubernetes secrets. I don't want to go too far in this because we got Taylor next month, but understanding the life cycle of secrets, how they can be accessed, how we can remove them, how we can protect them, just general knowledge that every admin should know. And then again, I mentioned container runtimes. Yeah, sealed secrets. There you go. Thanks, Jessica. I mentioned container runtime. So runtime class is going to make a big move, especially in the coming years with the Docker deprecation and the introduction of other runtimes. So understand when to use different runtimes, how you can implement it in the different manifests and Kubernetes objects. Now into some of the more supply chain security focused stuff. We have securing base container images. It's not enough that we just secure things at runtime. We have to actually secure our supply chain. That means securing our Dockerfile images and our image builds. So, understanding and knowing how to, let's say, proofread specific content, or maybe remove containers that are malicious or things like that. Those are worth knowing. It's, work on your, let's say, Sherlock skills in the clusters and try to figure out exactly what is wrong, using the ability to sort through manifests using JSON and things like that will definitely help you during the exam. And then allowed secure registries. So with the certain admission controllers, I don't want to give away too much, but admission controllers will help you allow secure registries as well as block specific content or containers and images from being able to be run on your cluster. There are some great documentation on the Kubernetes website that I recommend you go read as well about how to stop registries and how to block registries from being accessed in your cluster. Image scanning. Oh yeah, that was the other tool I forgot to mention. I'm glad I put this up. Was Trivy. So scanning containers for critical issues, Trivy CNCF application. And image scanning, I think you're starting to see this sort of built into a lot of, whether it's like Amazon and Google and stuff like that, but really being able to import images, especially if you're on-prem, run scanning against it, and then actually have it as a private registry that you verified where the image is coming from, and it is minimal in scope. Those are really important to your supply chain. So image scanning, being able to use it, understand what the CVEs mean, how to act on them, and identify issues in the cluster and before they even hit the cluster is very important. And I think we're getting towards the end, so sorry if I'm rambling, but audit logging and audit policy is very important. I think all the three major cloud providers are starting to allow for this now, but basically during the configuration, you can manage your audit logging policy, what you want to look at. Do you just want to look at metadata? Do you want to look at any changes in deployments? Do you want to look at any changes in secrets? Really, your audit policy and how you configure your audit policy, especially during cluster setup, is really going to help you be able to narrow down and identify bad actors, so that when you do actually get to your monitoring and logging in your observability tools, that you're not just blasted with a bunch of audit logs of everything that's changing in the cluster, right? There might be a specific aspect of the cluster and specific changes that the moment they happen, we want to know, like, hey, our secrets got changed. Well, we can configure it so audit policy, as soon as there's a change in secrets, notifies us immediately. So again, audit logging, how to configure it, how to set a schedule, a cadence as to how long we hold audit logs. It's very important that we understand how to apply that. All right, so I rambled enough. These are my general tips. This is what I found really useful. Documentation tells you everything you need to know. And I cannot harp on this enough. Read the documentation and read it fully. When you sign up for the CKS, there's kind of a whole checklist of things to do. You basically verify it's you. It gives you all the documentation. This is what you can look at. This is what you can read. Read it all. Seriously, it'll help you a lot before you get into the exam. You are allowed bookmarks. So you're allowed two internet tabs open. You are allowed bookmarks. So if you're reading through something and you're like, hey, I think this is really useful, I want to get it on the test, I recommend you bookmark it or have like a folder of all your bookmarks that you can just go, oh, boom, like I needed to know this admission controller. Here's where it is. It will save you a lot of time using Control F during the exam. Recording task progression. So in some of the previous ones, there was a notepad. Now the newer versions that we have flags. So like as you go through the exam, there are flags that you can put to say, hey, I need to come back to this question, or maybe I didn't even do it at all. Recording your progression is really useful. I actually found that the questions that I was very sure of, I put a flag on, and then I went back to the ones that didn't have flags. I found that useful, and I was able to kind of go back and be like, oh, I think that's where I was around on the percentage. So be proficient in VI Vim editing on the test. So the tabs and spaces are configured for you automatically, which is awesome. I'm so glad that they did that in the test. And sometimes, like let's say you want to change a container image on the fly, instead of running a dry run, pulling the YAML and then editing it in the YAML, you can edit directly using the kubectl edit function. So I found that really useful for changing things on the fly. Like I said, never write a YAML from scratch. Learn how to sort with JSON outputs. Yes, so there are, maybe it's like, hey, we have 10 of these images, like figure out which one is bad. Or, hey, we have all these pods. I want you to figure out which image is this, or which one has this secret. Being able to sort through using labels and JSON outputs will help you move through the cluster more efficiently. Yes, so the exam uses kubeadm for creating Kubernetes clusters. So if you want to go and get used to it, and you go and use like GKE or something like that, you're not going to have access to the master node. So it's worthwhile, reading Kubernetes, understanding how bare bones Kubernetes works, how it gets deployed, where the config files are, how to interact in the file system, and things like that. Highly recommend that. Using SSH, yeah, I said this at the beginning, so make sure that you exit whenever you're in a work or a master node, which also makes sure that they do specify sometimes, like, this is in the master node, this is in the worker node. You don't need to go into the node. They're very very descriptive in their context, which is why I say read the whole question first before you get started. And lastly, general resources that I found really useful. So Killer SH does a great job. They have been doing it since the CKA and the CKAD, and they use that same environment applied to the CKS. I really liked what they did. Have a lot of great questions. Walid Shiri, I hope I'm pronouncing that. Walid, don't go back to me. I ping with him sometimes. He's a great resource. Has a great GitHub account with basically everything. I mean, there's a ton of stuff on there, so I really recommend it. Personal repo is at StackRox. It's a little shrunk down. I used basically Terraform and RKE to build a 119 cluster, and I have just a couple of exercises I went through. I'm going to continue updating that as the CKS progresses. So I would love to hear what you have from there, and if you want to go and add to it as well, would love to chat to you about it. And that is all I have for you. So thank you, good luck, and I hope to see some certification passes on LinkedIn and Twitter and things like that. Thanks, everyone. I think we have Tam coming in.
Hey. Awesome job. That was a lot of good information. Steve wanted to come up too, so I'm going to pull him up too. Let's see. First question we have here. Kubernetes version upgrade is CKA. Why should security folks know this?
So it's in both. So if it's in the CKA and it's mentioning it, that's, I think, the CNCF pushing the message of we've moved on to 1.2.0 right now, and the most used version is 1.1.5, which isn't even supported by the Kubernetes community right now, right? 1.1.8 is pretty much the farthest back that's supported. Certain cloud providers have actually done a better job at this moving forward, like Amazon is supporting business. They still support 1.1.5, but that's the bottom right now. Like basically everybody's moving up. So if you're on 1.1.5, there is somewhat of a push to get in and start using these new features. And I think that's what the CNCF wants to do, is they want to actually slow down their cadence, get everybody on board so that we can kind of support people and, allow basically enterprise and stuff like that to get a little bit more stable and understanding of the new features.
Awesome. Let's see if we have any more. In general, how do people find out more information about CKS? I know you've been working a lot on all of, prepping for the exam yourself. What would you suggest?
Sure. Yeah. The CKS. So if you're on the CNCF Slack, I recommend going there. They have a breakdown of the CKA, CKAD, CKS, all with chats there. I'm in there too. So if you want to ask a question about the CKS, Waleed's in there. There's a bunch of good resources of people posting stuff. I recommend you start there. People will want to help you. And then, join on GitHub, join Waleed or me or something like that, and ping us with examples that you'd like to see in there. And also, I'm doing a longer talk. So I'm joining up with the CNCF to do a longer talk about this, where I'm not as rushed, and I'll flesh out a little bit more details. That's coming up next week, I believe on Thursday.
You've already scared the living crap out of me.
Oh, yeah.
I have a question. Well, there was a lot of content there, Michael. That was awesome. Was there any sections while you were doing, and I realized any question I ask you, you can decline, where you got into it and went, I should have studied more here? Because that's the hard part. Yeah,
I think one of the biggest things is I thought I had a certain grasp of applications, but it was very high level. It wasn't hands-on, right? So I'd say that understanding, you can understand the concepts, but I think you really need to actually understand the general workflow, because it is a time performance test. So that was, I think, the biggest challenge. If you haven't taken it in a while, you get in, it's like, okay, well, here's a new exam with a bunch of new bells and whistles, and you get a little bit overwhelmed. And then you might mess up maybe your file editing workflow. Like, those are the things that compound to you rushing in the end and failing the test. So it's like, go in, calm down, drink some water, read, trust yourself, and then also, understand when Kubernetes gives you and says, here's the documentation that you need to know, read it and understand it. They give you everything that you need to pass.
There's a question from the chat, I think just now, that somebody asked, and this is philosophical. How big of a benefit do you think having a CKS or CKA is in terms of finding a job?
It depends on your background. I think if you're going to get into Kubernetes, and especially if you have no experience at your job and you want to get into Kubernetes, I'd say it is very, very beneficial. If you have no projects and you can say, hey, I got a CKA, that means you've pretty much gone and probably deployed Kubernetes in some aspect, taken a test, you've gotten hands-on, you understand how to at least do the basics in the workflow. I think it's very important. If you have obviously been working with Kubernetes for the last 4 years or something like that, and you have a lot of various projects, then you can lean on that. As for the CKS, I actually think that if you want to get into the security space in Kubernetes, and again, you don't have any projects or anything like that, I think it's a huge benefit. And I actually found it one of the harder exams out of the 3. So I think maybe for a reason, partially because it is so broad and you have to actually keep up with all the tools. There's a bunch of different ways to implement it, but long-winded way of saying, I think the benefit is there. I think that, especially, by the way, I forgot to mention that a lot of the times these certificates are on sale, or Honey will give you some money off. So definitely worthwhile, and the study process will help a lot.
That's pretty cool. And we just got another question as well. This is good. We're going to keep them coming. So for someone who doesn't necessarily have Kubernetes at their work and doesn't necessarily have a paid environment they can play in, what's the best way to build a lab environment outside of work?
Outside of work. So yeah, that's a tough one. Minikube honestly is the easiest. I don't know if you want to spend the money, but Raspberry Pi clusters can get set up. There's a bunch of different walkthroughs online that people can help you with. The other thing, so one of the, if you go on my the GitHub that I created at StackRox, I created basically a makefile that uses RKE to deploy a 119 cluster, and I just go deploy it on GKE, and I just shut it down when I'm done. And so if I go and I use the cluster for 2 or 3 hours, it costs me $2. So if you're using basically GK, AKS, I think Azure does it too, they have $200 free credit. If I want to study, as long as I'm not leaving those VMs up, I'm well within my range. So that's another recommendation.
Let me pull up Jessica. She had a recommendation too.
Cool.
I was
Hey, Jessica.
Hi. I'm hiding down in the corner there. Docker for desktop is actually the most used in offices with Windows that I've noticed, because they do have the option to turn Kubernetes on and you can test locally. So if you don't have a lot of computer space and you don't have a lot of money to go out into cloud lands, that's definitely a cute starting point for the time being.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty cool. Anybody else use Kind? I use Kind for desktop-based Kubernetes clusters. That's pretty cool. So there's another one when I'm not using my pies back there.
Yeah. One of the other, like, I find those are really good for starting with the CKA especially, and working within Kubernetes. The CKS, it really hits on more, like, you have to understand the ins and outs of like AppArmor and the different applications on the node too. So finding environments like that, I actually find is the toughest part about CKS. Is, hey, here's all these tools. Well, nobody really has an environment out there with all those tools actually, integrated and working. So it is a tough test to follow along, and I hope that as the year goes along, we'll see more resources come out mimicking the environment, so to speak.
Yeah, there's no courses out there yet, is there? Not that I've seen.
I think there is one, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. If I see it, I will post it in like the YouTube chat description as well, with all the other resources that I recommend.
So I think if you've not done CKA or CKS, and you can go get like pretty cheap courses from Linux Academy or Udemy, you get an environment there. Nothing's stopping you from practicing for CKS at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and honestly, if you're going to do the CKA, and especially if you can get them on sale or something like that, sometimes they do like a fire sale on them. Yeah, I would recommend it, because if staying in the context of the exam actually really helps you, you do the CKA, you understand the CLI, you understand kind of the workflow that they're trying to show you, then you can. It'll be very similar across tests.
We have a question about roughly how much time did you need to prep for CKS?
I prepped for about a month and a half. It came out in November, and I took it over the holidays. So the other thing is you do get that free retake. So you can prep if you're unsure exactly what's going on when you get to the test. You do get a free retake. So use it. Way better, instead of being overwhelmed and just avoiding it altogether. Get in there, understand the questions, understand what they're asking, take all those learned lessons, and then apply it and come back even better.
Great.
Cool. And again, ping me if you guys have any questions on Slack.
Or on Twitter. There's his Twitter ID right there.
Oh yeah, or Twitter. Cool.
Awesome. Well, let's see.
Tam.
Thank you to the speakers. This is our first episode. There will be many more. Just a reminder, this is our next scheduled meetup for next month. And then something I totally almost forgot to mention is we created a virtual lounge, Kubernetes lounge. So if you guys want to connect with us after this meetup, let me share that link. It's pretty cool. You can network, ask more questions if you have more, and connect with our speakers. So let me pull that up, and I'll post it in chat too. It's an AirMeet link, something we're piloting. Let us know what you think. If you take the feedback survey, we'd love to hear your feedback. We're always looking to improve these meetups. And then I think that's it. Did I forget anything?
Should we pop that link into the chat?
Somebody's asking for the Slack group.
Oh, it's in there. Good. Oh, yeah. Ask Michael Foster on Twitter.
All right. If that's it, then hopefully we see you in the virtual K8s lounge, and check us out for the next meetup. Thanks, everyone.
See you in the lounge.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Thank
Take
you.
care.